Hello, I am your host, Geneva Mayne, speech language pathologist, owner of Parts of Speech PLLC in New York, and doctoral candidate at Mayne University. I'm here with my co-host, Kristen Ruiz, who is also a doctoral candidate, singing voice specialist, vocal producer, founder and director of Sonora Voice, and the former program director of NYU's postgraduate advanced voice pedagogy program.
Welcome. I am so excited to introduce our new podcast, The Agentic Voice. And our first segment here is what's new and what's good. In this podcast, we're going to involve stakeholders. So we're talking about medical practitioners, therapists, clients, patients, researchers, teachers, all of us who are involved in the multifaceted world of voice use and voice care. And so we're going to involve all of these stakeholders in an ongoing discussion on how trauma-informed care can advance health equity for vulnerable populations seeking voice care. And we're also going to aim to increase awareness of the prevalence and effects of trauma on the voice and the agentic practices that improve patient and client outcomes. So the idea here behind what's new and what's good, this segment, it's to cultivate an attitude of gratitude, which is actually a protective factor. I want to say that again, because that's actually really amazing. So gratitude is a protective factor for people who are going through hardship, adversity, trauma. So when things are rough, it's not always easy to have an attitude of gratitude, but it's something that can be cultivated. And to the degree that we cultivate it, well-being and even voice use can shift. So we're really excited to kind of share these things and explore these with you.
Okay, so then it's been a while since we've talked. You've been super, super busy. So what's new and what's good with you?
Oh, well, I'm here in the mid-coast of Maine right now, away for a couple days. Speaking of gratitude, it's been kind of a heavy couple weeks for us and our family. We had the loss of a dear loved one, and talking about gratitude, going through kind of the stormy seas of mourning and grief, but celebrating a life well lived and the love that we received from this dear family member. So we're here in Maine to kind of spend a couple days putting a couple pieces of life back in and really exploring what it is to live gratitude, even when it's kind of challenging. Also kind of excited because my chapter 4 of my dissertation it's almost finished. So we're getting to it. And this chapter's been kind of my Mount Everest. So I'm very excited to almost be done with it. What about you, my friend? What's going on? What's new and what's good with you?
Oh my goodness, there's so many things. Really, really grateful to have finally purchased a home in New York. As you and I both know, housing is so expensive here. And so my sister and I decided to purchase a home together, and it's been quite a journey just trying to get that down payment together. So 20 minutes from you again, which is so funny because I remember when we first met, we met in Utah at SVI at the University of Utah, and found out we were 20 minutes apart, and then you moved and
Back in
then
New
not
York.
so much, and now we're 20 minutes apart again. So that's pretty cool.
Geneva, there's a magnet between us. We got to just hold on to that.
Yes.
Amazing.
And I'm super, super excited to have walked for my doctoral degree. I'm still completing requirements, but the last really big requirement is my product, which is kind of what's motivating this podcast. And we decided to call the podcast The Agentic Voice because agency is the belief that you can direct your life towards achieving your desired goals and aspirations. And you and I both know that coming from my own voice disorder and all of the things that were leading up to it, which we'll share in later episodes, I was feeling a loss of agency, and you were so instrumental in helping me regaining that sense in my voice and in my life. So this podcast, we're going to use the term agentic voice, talking about empowering the voice to vocalize what it wants and the way it wants to. And we're talking about the agents or people who empower other voices and the practices that they use to do so. So I'm super excited to have our first episode. Moving on to our next segment, I kind of shared a little bit about my story, and I think our stories will be presented in our Experience, Strength, and Hope podcast segment. So in that segment, we're going to invite scientists, researchers, practitioners to share case studies, or even clients and patients to share their story around regaining or losing vocal agency. So in our first episode, I thought we would look at an article that came out in the beginning of June.
Yeah, I took a look at it. Yeah, Sarah-Louise Young, her story is about the shame she felt with the loss of her instrument, with the loss of her voice. And she talked about how she was mortified. And it's, speaking of gratitude, I'm very grateful to her for sharing her story, because this is the story of a lot of singers, a lot of voice users. So yeah, her sharing it, I think it's going to be part of the empowerment move that I think is coming. And I think we're already seeing evidence of this.
Yeah, so I'm just going to read a couple of the points that are really resonated with me. She said, for 14 years, I'd worked professionally in theater, hiding the fact that every few months, my voice would completely disappear. Despite steaming my head over bowls of hot water, giving up alcohol, and praying to Dr. Theater as the final curtain fell on each production, my melodic soprano would disintegrate. A few days of silence and it would return. The shame I felt at losing my voice was paralyzing, but why? And it really struck me, the word she described her feelings. She used to describe her feelings. She used the word shame. Yep. And then later on, she said, guilt. It really struck me. She didn't use guilt. She used mortified. That was the word she used. And it really struck me because these words, those who, not everyone who experiences adversity experiences trauma or endures trauma, but those who do may feel a sense of powerlessness. They may question why me, and experience feelings of humiliation, shame, guilt, and or betrayal. Very like isolating, you're by yourself feelings, and there's something very wrong with you that is unlike others, So that really struck me that she used those words. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration here in the United States, they say that trauma is a physically or emotionally harmful experience that has lasting adverse effects on an individual's functioning and well-being. And I just think, when she's talking about feelings of being ashamed or feeling like she was paralyzed or mortified, that's really it, the emotional embodiment of or the emotional expression of trauma. Then she goes on to say, there were always students in voice rest. You knew us by the thick scarves around our necks, even in the middle of summer, and the doom looks on our faces, cautionary tales, sitting at rehearsals while others took our places. Had I been sent back then for a laryngoscopy, they would have discovered 2 soft polyps in residence. Instead, I graduated and embarked upon an endless cycle of work, secret collapse, and hidden recovery for the next 11 years. I got away with it until one day I finally lost my voice on stage during a show. It's amazing, isn't it? That she was feeling, I'm sure she must have had someone that she could talk to. Well, I hope she did. Yeah. She says she finally reached out to a specialist and he discovered her cysts, which he thought had been there since childhood. They were soft, which explained why her issue was sporadic. And then the consultant asked her if anything had happened to her in childhood to traumatize her voice.
Don't you think that was super insightful of the consultant to look at that?
Yeah, and it's interesting that she's going between these different terminologies. She says specialist at one point, consultant at another point, surgeon. I don't know if they're all the same person or different people on a team. But yeah, I do think it was super insightful because, when someone's asking under the age of 10, they're really asking about an adverse childhood experience or an ACE,
Mhm.
which has been researched extensively to have effects, especially when you have cumulative ACEs, has been shown to have effects in adulthood related to mental health, physical health,
Yeah.
your life achievements.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was insightful for the person to kind of ask. And
Yeah,
she
and I
says
think
go
oh, go
ahead.
ahead. Well, I was going to say when it comes to voice, things get complicated fast because you're dealing with, physical tissue. It's an actual instrument. So there can be environmental, external or internal factors going on. So you can look at like, is it allergies? Is it the sometimes overdiagnosed, but sometimes diagnosed acid reflux? Is it, allergies? Is it, whatever, irritants? And then you've got the idea of things that affect the nervous system, affect the voice. So, are there psychological components? Are there nervous system responses that are affecting the voice use? And then you've got the inner dialogue. You've got the social dynamics. Stress levels, fatigue levels, hydration levels. Like there's so many things that we can be looking at. So unpacking it can sometimes be daunting. So the idea that she was struggling with this for what was it, 11 years?
Right.
Um, it it tugs at the heartstrings for sure, but it makes sense because it is the story of many, many singers trying to figure out what it is. And then you're also having the coping skills because especially when you're in, a high demand vocal job, then what happens is you want to be able to show up. So then you're going to spend a lot of time, energy, and attention making sure that you are coping, so yeah, I think there's a lot that can resonate with a wide population here.
Yeah, she describes the ACE that she experienced as a sexual attack in broad daylight. And she talks about how the person, put their hand over her mouth. And she says they never caught the man. And after the initial distress, I never gave it much thought. But the hand on my mouth, the stifled scream, but the mind forgets, the body remembers. Yeah.
Powerful.
So yeah, what a powerful and vivid description, and what courage she had to share it. And I think probably in the 11 years where she was experiencing, her struggles with voice in her career, um, it wasn't always where it wasn't necessarily a climate where people spoke freely about those things.
Exactly.
And I think that climate is changing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then she talks about even after she had that experience, then she had another experience where the surgeon had to operate. She said 3 years later, performing a show about Julie Andrews for 6 weeks through bronchitis. The irony was not lost on me. True to form, I finished the run and in walked Tom Waits. This time, the surgeon decided to operate. My cysts had burst, and in the end, he sliced off less than a millimeter of scar tissue. But it was life-changing. Recovery was slow and scary, but the result was unquestionable. My voice was healed, and singing was, for the first time since childhood, effortless. She said, I was excited to reveal my new voice to the world, but instead, industry gatekeepers warned her that if she let anyone know about the surgery, she would be perceived as damaged goods. And I know that resonates with you because you've spoken with me about that before, about how the climate in a professional setting can be really detrimental. You've used the word like hegemony, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. It's like
She
we
said,
can, yeah, I think it can be competitive, it is competitive. And so it's a strong temptation to then place yourself in disempowering situations because you feel that pressure to hold on to that position. So, yeah.
yeah, she said she was encouraged to stay silent and if she ever wanted to work again, but instead, and this is the moment of empowerment, the moment of agency, she says instead, she spoke or she used her voice. She spoke to other singers and heard similar stories. We needed to reach out to each other in solidarity, not fear. And I love how she just kind of overcomes that shame and fear. And she reaches out for social support, which is another protective factor in addition to gratitude for those who have experienced trauma, you know? Mm-hmm. So that kind of is going to introduce our final segment for today, agentic practices. We have to make a jingle around that. So agentic practices are the practices we can use to support trauma recovery and the development of vocal agency. And I remember one of the things that attracted me to you when we were at Summer Vocology Institute in Utah was that you would say things all the time that were just socially supportive. Like you would say things like build your tribe. You would say things like we lift as we climb. And you've said them repeatedly. I've heard you say them to me and to other people over the last, many years of our friendship. And I want to ask you, how did you come to embrace this agentic practice and this belief, which it's so clear that you live through your practice?
Oh, amazing. Well, I have, as a singer and a voice user, I've been in singing communities that were extremely encouraging, healthy, vibrant. I've also been in communities that were toxic, and it was more important to get ahead than collaboration. So competition over collaboration. And for me personally, I did not thrive in that environment. In fact, I ended up developing some performance anxiety. So I ended up experiencing a kind of voicelessness that in certain situations, I wasn't able to actually share what I had to share. And so what I started to put together is that in environments where it was safe, where the focus was on sharing a story, a mission, an experience, I had easy access to my instrument, to my voice, inner and singing. Yeah, exactly. And it's, at first it felt very strange because I'm like, why does the voice show up in this area, but not in this area? And when it didn't show up, I used to be like, I wish you guys could have seen me in that other room. It was really good. And so what do I do with that? And as I started to unpack it and talk to other singers and read up on some of this, started to see that social environment, kind of the heart of what humanity is, and then taking the singing arts, that idea of telling the stories of human experience. When I was able to get to the core, and the social interactions are really a major part of that, I started to see that I would thrive. And as I started to then use my own singing clients as guinea pigs, I love you guys, but started to create that kind of environment for my singers, the same thing was happening. And not only were they feeling like the well-being in them was growing, the singing quality, like the ability for the voice to translate on the outside what they thought and felt on the inside, was then starting to mirror each other. And I happened to read, I was reading a book actually on feminism and science, and there was a reference to the NACW. And so this was in the 1890s, and this was a women's organization that they were dealing with, women's rights, the right to vote. They were looking at the intersectionality. They may not have explained it this way, but the intersectionality of feminism and racial equality. So they were looking at those, and their tenet was lifting as we climb. So when I heard that, it was like, oh my goodness, there's a phrase that actually represents this thing that's actually life-giving in every area I see it, that I see it applied. And I started to see, oh my goodness, this singing voice. It's not that you don't know it, but as you walk deeper in it, you start to see, kind of see things at a spiral in deeper. And I started to see that the inner voice and the singing voice are so intimately related. And singing is not a solo sport. Voice use is not a solo sport. It is situated in the context of social factors. And so that's kind of where it all came from. And it started out as my own struggle that then turned into kind of exploration and experiments to saying, like, to the point that now it's becoming a way of life that is breathing life, where for some of us who've struggled with that feeling of voicelessness, it's giving us voice. So that social component is massive. And I think that there's also, I want to say it was Vygotsky. There's a lot of thoughts on the inner dialogue that we have, that inner voice, inner speech.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple different approaches to understanding it. But the idea is that whatever that inner self-talk is, has functional significance.
Mm.
Not just like, oh yeah, I told myself something, and I said something in my mind, and now I feel good or bad. No, literally it affects function, has functional significance. And so then when we look at the inner dialogue is in an interconnected relationship with the social context in which we find ourselves, the more we can nurture that social part, the more the inner dialogue grows, which then adds to that functional growth as well.
Yeah, I've been, I believe her name is Neff. I have to check.
Okay.
And I'll reference that in the podcast notes, the episode notes, when we disseminate this. But she talks about self-compassion. Mm. And it's made up of 3 components. And one of those components is the kindness that you direct towards yourself and your self-talk. And that's kind of what I'm remembering as you spoke just now. Yeah. But I wonder, is there room, you kind of specialize in high performance voice work. Is there room for competition for, high level performers? Or do you think the primary motivator should be this idea of lifting as we climb?
I don't see them as in opposition. In fact, I see them as very complementary.
Interesting.
So the idea of with competition, I think there's a way to reframe it. So there's a toxicity that can come along with trying to take something as complex as a human being, and then something as complex as voice, and something as complex as the perceivers of that sound. I mean, you've got a lot of layers here, and then to whittle it down to a metric system that then we're going to rate people. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's some dysfunction built into the system. I think also, there's a practicality of, there's so many roles, and there's a lot of people, there's more people who want certain roles than there are roles to go around. So there's a practicality component to it. But I think that a reframe as this, in terms of the singer or the voice user's perspective, that if we conflate the competition culture with value, you can see all kinds of issues happening, whether it's vocal issues or other self-medicating, to whatever degree of function or harm. There can be all kinds of dysfunctions that come because of that. So I think a reframe, yes, there's room for competition, and yes, there's room for that idea of high performance and aiming for what is your personal best as an artist in the world that has something to say. But I think that the we lift as we climb is the idea that, listen, there's probably somebody ahead of me, and I'm going to be inspired by them. And there's somebody behind me, and I'm going to, as I take my next step, I'm going to drag them along with me. There's room for everyone. And, you mentioned before about that idea of build your tribe. We all have certain colors of sound, certain stories, certain and musical energies that we're drawn to. To say that there is only a small space, like, no, it's a really big pie. There's room for so many people. And I think that the idea is that if we can embrace this idea of we lift as we climb, not only will we be offering something fuller to the world, because we ourselves have been made richer by these thoughts. So then whatever situation we bring ourselves to is going to be richer. Then we're also providing inspiration for those behind us. and we've got people ahead of us to look towards. So I think of them as, you know, if and literally this morning I was working with a singer walking into a competition. She's flying out tomorrow. And the thing is that to the degree that she has agency over herself, inner voice and speaking and singing voice, to that degree, when she brings that fullness, that agency onto stage, it would be a hard sell for me to believe that that's not more powerful than the competition culture of yesteryear.
I think that is powerful, and it's a great note for us to end on. So just as a quick sum up, we talked about two powerful agentic practices: gratitude and building your tribe, social support.
Actually, with the gratitude, could I interject one thing?
Sure.
Just one thing to share, that the idea of gratitude too is this idea that it raises your vibration, it raises your vibe, and the more we learn in science, it's like vibration is the new frontier, right? Everything is vibrating from the tiniest to the universal. And so the idea of gratitude is going to raise your vibe, your vibration. And when we think about voice, whether it's speaking voice or singing voice, it is vibration. And so that higher vibration has an impact on the nervous system, which has an impact on the use of like how breath and muscle and the pressures are distributed and all of these amazing acoustic things. They're all interconnected. So the higher your vibe, it really is connected, at least in my anecdotal experience of this, watching singer after singer after singer shift into gratitude, that has very real effects on the voice function. I've seen it over and over. It's hard to doubt it.
Oh my goodness. These are all so good. I'm like having these little, they're going to become a part of my idiolects: vibrate higher, lift as we climb, build your tribe. I love it. To our listeners, we hope you found some nuggets and pearls you can take into your practice over the next few weeks. We can provide some powerful signals of care to patients or clients who have experienced trauma by extending social support.
Yeah. And look out for the next episode in a few weeks. We hope to actually publish these episodes bi-monthly. And you can also look for links and references related to today's episode in our episode notes.
Take care.
All right. Bye, everybody.